All right. Thank you very much for, of course, for tuning in for another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast. And of course, of course, you can find, of course, you can, find this show on iTunes, on Google, on Spotify, and of course on Anchor first and foremost. But of course, this is NFL season, and of course, in honor of one of the NFL's all-time greats, his birthday, happens to be this week, October 13th, to be exact. And side note, by the way, of course, you can follow this show on YouTube. Of course, go on YouTube, look up Von Resper Jr. Of course, that's the YouTube channel name. Make sure to like and subscribe as well. But of course, this week, as of October 13th, will be the incredible milestone when it comes to an NFL icon, NFL legend. Even though he's on a different team than what my normal team is, what I mean. I still show respect to him, and just because of everything he's done, all of his remarkable accomplishments, so like his name, like I say, his name is all over the of course the NFL's record books in general anyway. And the guy that I'm referring to is none other than number 80 himself from the San Francisco 49ers, Jerry Rice. And, and the thing is, over the course of a remarkable 20-year career, this guy has been a 13th. Of course, he's been a 3-time Super Bowl champion. Of course, as I mentioned in my top 10 receivers list episode, like I said, he's a 3-time Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP. He's a 13-time Pro Bowler, 10-time first team All Pro. And of course, I'm gonna see if I could, run off, several of his accomplishments. Obviously, he's a Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer. Like I said, 10-time first team All Pro. Of course, he was a 1-time second team All Pro. Of course, he led the league and led the league in receiving yards 6 times, receptions twice, touchdowns 6 times as well. Of course, he's a 2-time offensive player of the year. You know what I mean? And so, like I said, like I said, his accomplishments, pretty much like go on and on and on. Of course, he's been named to the NFL 80s All-Decade Team as well as the 90s All-Decade Team. Just because of how dominant he was in both of those eras, both of those decades, and in fact, the way that he redefined the wide receiver position for an entire generation and for all generations to come. And so if anything, I'm going to give like I said, give a rundown of of his prime years, and also the fact that this guy was still even able to make the Pro Bowl at 40 with the Raiders, and so he's like 5,000 yards ahead of the second, of course the second place leading receiver. He's got 41 touchdowns ahead of that who is second place. You know what I mean? So like I said, if anything, Jerry's career is absolutely unparalleled. And of course there's a lot of ground to cover. And without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and start. So of course, Jerry came from Mississippi, born October 13th, 1962. Born to a very large family, and the way and the thing about it is that Jerry picked up his skills when it came to catching from catching bricks from his dad, and because his dad used to build houses, from scratch, from bricks, and so so of course as a kid. Helping his dad work. That's where he picked up those skills, and that's where he picked up his work ethic and everything like that. And so, years later, after like I said, sorry about that. Let me slow down. Sorry about that. Let me slow down. Years later, after doing very, after doing very well in his senior year of high school. Jerry goes to Mississippi Valley State. Of course, for those that don't know, is actually HBCU. So for those out there that pride themselves on going to HBCUs, just to let you know that the greatest player of his position came out of HBCU. You know what I mean? So you know what I mean. So, and of course, what, of course, uh, of course, during his time there, Rice absolutely excelled, especially during the course of his junior and senior years over there. And so Jerry was at Mississippi Valley State University, like I said, from 1981 to 1984. And so after he had an absolutely stellar and incredible record-breaking season at Mississippi Valley State, that actually caught the attention of NFL scouts. And of course, once again, for those that pride themselves on HBCU, going to HBCU, like I said, just look at Jerry's career and and everything he's accomplished. That's a prime example of some pretty a prime example of some pretty remarkable things. Like I said, pretty remarkable players to come out of HBCUs. And so 1983, he actually had a record-setting. In 1983, Jerry had a record-setting campaign for his college, and so of course he set records for for receptions for 102, receiving yards 1,450. He was named a first-team Division I AA All-American as well. And so sorry about that. And of course, even as a senior in 1984, he actually surpassed his original record from the previous year for receiving yards 1,845 and receptions 112 with 27 touchdown receptions in that season as well. So of course with that being said, all eyes were glued to him. You know what I mean? All of a sudden, he became a target for NFL scouts. And so I guess, and the thing is, the only drawback from him probably being the first overall was his 40-yard dash time. And there are sources that say it was either 4.45, 4.71. A lot of those sources, I think, lean more towards the 4.71 speed. And so even though coming out of college and going to the league, even though his 40-yard dash time wasn't that great, but the thing is that a lot of people eventually started to realize that there's a difference between 40-yard dash speed and game speed. So even though his 40 time wasn't that great, but when it came to his breakaway speed in the game with the ball in his hands, running routes, then that was a completely different story altogether. And so both the Dallas Cowboys and the San Francisco 49ers were the main teams that actually showed interest in him. And so, and of course, you all know the rest of history. The latter actually, actually decided to bet on him. And so one of the things that actually motivated Rice to be even better was the fact that Irving Fryer from the New England Patriots was actually drafted ahead of him. And so I mean, so that was one of the things that really sparked a certain fire under him. Really lit a torch under him. Let me slow down. And so with that, let me slow down. So of course, with that being said, the Cowboys ended up losing out on Rice, and so the 49ers drafted him as the 16th overall selection in 1985. And so Bill Walsh, the late great Bill Walsh, described Rice as a swift, smooth player who's got great instincts, running with the ball, going to the ball and catching it in a crowd. And so and the thing is, the thing about it is that those draft descriptions or rookie descriptions or attributes really started to manifest over the course of his career. Now, initially, everything, I'll say like this: initially, everything didn't quite turn out all that great as a rookie, because just like a lot of rookies, Jerry had to go through a learning curve. And so even though and the thing is, even though in his rookie season he actually made even though in his rookie season he actually made like the all rookie team at the time, he did drop a lot of passes. And as a rookie, he had 49 receptions for 927 yards and only 3 touchdowns. Because and slow down. And I'll say it like this: the thing about that is the fact that he didn't quite know the team's playbook. He didn't really know. He didn't really know. He wasn't all that acclimated or accustomed to the offense. You know what I mean? So initially, just like anybody else, Jerry had his fair share of learning curves as a rookie. But at the same time, this investment definitely paid off. Because of the fact that this was absolute gift for the 49ers, because they were the defending Super Bowl champions, and for Montana to get a prize like this that extended his career, extended his greatness, prolonged his greatness, and really took his game to a whole nother level. And it was only a matter of time before Jerry really tapped in to that, or at least it was only a matter of time before Bill Walsh was able to help Jerry buy into that vision and really tap into the greatness that everybody knew that he was capable of having. And so during the, like I said, and the thing is, during the off season, like I said, during the off season going into 1986, Jerry spent a lot of his time studying the 49ers playbook, and clearly it paid off, because that next season, 1986, was definitely his first breakout season. And the thing is, what I mean by that was that this season was not only his first Pro Bowl season, but was also his first All Pro season. The first time they ever made the first team All Pro. And the results showed, because that season he had 86 receptions for 1,570 yards, 15 touchdowns, and that season was the first year he actually led the league in yards and touchdowns. And with that being said, only the best was yet to come. So by 1987, however, the NFL got hit with a slight speed bump, if you will, because that because that season the league had gone under a strike. However, that did not deter Jerry, because even with a strike shortened season, he still managed to make history. And this season, and of course during this season, he originally set the NFL record book for most touchdowns in a season with 22. This was a season where he originally set the NFL regular season record for touchdown receptions with 22 with 22 touchdowns off of 65 receptions and 1,078 yards. Once again, this was a strike shortened season, so you can only imagine what his numbers would look like had it been a full 16 games. And the fact that it took Randy Moss 4 more games to get 1 more touchdown than what Rice did in a strike shortened season speaks volumes, is a testament to Rice's greatness. You know what I mean? And so, like I said, and once again, as I've said before, the best is only yet to come. And it truly was yet to come, because the following season, even though Rice had 64 receptions, 1,306 yards, and he actually had a career high 20.4 yards per catch and 9 touchdowns. You know what I mean? But at the same time, even though the 49ers went like 10-6 that season or something, but but like I said, but the thing is, the reason why this is so special is because it turned out to be his very first Super Bowl season of his career. And the thing about it is that Jerry, when let me slow down. I'll say it like this: when the spotlight is on, Jerry was able to rise to the absolute greatest occasion. Because this season the 49ers went back to the Super Bowl, and of course they had a rematch with with the Cincinnati Bengals. You know, like, if anything, that was one of the 49ers like earlier, like that was me saying. When you think about it, the Niners and Bengals were the dance partners of the 80s. And so this was a rematch. And just, and of course, just like before, the 49ers come out and the 49ers come out in a winning fashion. And Rice was named the Super Bowl MVP with 11 receptions, 215 yards, and a touchdown. And he was very instrumental in the game winning drive. Of course, 11 plays, 92 yards, and a touchdown. And so Jerry was firing on all cylinders. He was if anything, he was the ultimate playmaker during that game. And another interesting thing about that game is that he had a bad ankle during that game. He had a swollen ankle during that game, and for him to carry his team, to carry his quarterback throughout that game, from start to finish, was absolutely remarkable. This is absolutely one of the greatest wide receiver performances in Super Bowl history, if not the greatest, even to this day, wide receiver performance in Super Bowl history. Like I said, it just goes to show that Jerry was not afraid. I said Jerry was not afraid of the spotlight. He was not afraid of the big stage. He rose to the occasion. If anything, Jerry was at his best when the lights were at their brightest. And another thing is that Jerry was also at his best when it came to the 2-minute warning. You know what I mean? And the reason why I said it is because of how incredible his stamina was. While everybody else was exhausted and worn out, Jerry somehow was able to kick his game into a whole nother gear. He was able to he was able to turn everything on to like I said to the highest gear possible. Let me slow down, but let me slow down. As I said before, in Super Bowl 23, Rice was a Super Bowl MVP, 11 receptions, 215 yards, and 1 touchdown. So, of course, the 49ers made sure to duplicate that success, and they certainly did. But, by the time we get into, like I said, by the time we get into the 1989 season, and this, you can very much say was the 49ers' best season. And it was certainly Montana's best season. You know what I mean? And the reason why I said it was Montana's best season was because it was the first time that he ever won the league MVP award. And the 49ers, like I said, that season, they were absolutely dominant. They were, like I said, without a doubt, they were absolute world beaters. And of course, before I get ahead of myself, Super Bowl 23 was also Bill Walsh's very last season as the 49ers head coach. And then of course, right after that, Walsh handed the reins over to George Seifert. So Seifert operated the machine that Walsh built, and he operated that, like I said, if anything, he operated that machine very, very well. Like I said, because of the fact that, because of the fact that the 49ers never ever missed a beat. Because that season, Rice had 82 receptions for 1,483 yards, 17 touchdowns. Both his yards and touchdown numbers led the league that season. For the 4th straight year, he was selected to the Pro Bowl and the first team first team All Pro. And the Niners finished the season with a 14-2 regular season record, the best in the entire league by far. And of course, in the Super Bowl, nothing changed. Same thing as before. In typical Jerry Rice fashion, he absolutely dominated and embarrassed the secondary. And so, and of course, in Super Bowl 24, they went up against the Denver Broncos and demolished them, absolutely smoked them and annihilated them 55-10. Even though Montana was the Super Bowl MVP, Rice had 7 receptions for 148 yards and 3 touchdowns in an absolute rout. In fact, the guy that was guarding, the guy that was defending him primarily was Steve Atwater, Hall of Famer, by the way. And Jerry absolutely torched him. He made it his business to absolutely destroy him, just like he would with any other cornerback going up against him. And Jerry was, and the thing is, and of course, another thing about Jerry's career, all throughout his career, he was able to draw double teams and triple teams, and no matter what, he still found a way to dominate. He still, like I said, and things, he still found a way to rise above everybody else. So 88, 89, the 49ers repeat as champions. And then by the time we get into the 1990 season, they look to have a three-peat. First, pretty much the first Super Bowl three-peat in NFL history. And once again, another successful year. Of course, he led the NFL in receptions, 100. Of course, the receiving yards, 1,000. Of course, 1,502, and touchdowns. Of course, touchdowns with 13. And he also became the first player to lead the NFL in all three categories in the Super Bowl era. He became the very first player to lead the NFL in all three of those categories in the era of the Super Bowl. So so if anything, he was already making his march to GOAT status by the time he was in his fifth and sixth seasons. However, the 49ers failed to three-peat as they fell short against the New York Giants in the playoffs. And so, and that just so happened to be Montana's second MVP season. And so, and of course, after that, there seemed to be somewhat of a shakeup. Eventually, when it came to 49ers leadership, and what I mean by that is that the very next season, in 1991, Joe Montana goes down with the injury. He's sidelined for the entire season, and now Jerry has to adjust to a new quarterback, enter Steve Young, and so, and I'll say like this, the key to I guess sort of the point of contention, if you will, to Jerry's adjustment was the fact that Young was a left-handed quarterback. So Jerry had to, if anything, let me slow down. Jerry had to find a way to make adjustments and find ways to catch from a left-handed quarterback, because he never had a quarterback that was left-handed. So, and not only that, Steve Young was also more mobile than Montana. So, and let me slow down. And I would say like this. And the thing about it was that even I say like this. Even with a new quarterback, Jerry still hadn't missed a beat, and so that season he had 80 receptions, 1,000, and like I said, 1,206 yards, and a league-leading 14 touchdowns. But this, like I said, but at the same time, this season was still a transitional period. A transitional period for him as well as the team in and of itself. And so, of course, the 49ers failed to go back to the Super Bowl once again. And then, of course, the next season, Steve Young wins his first MVP award, and of course, during that season, Rice has 84 receptions for 1,201 yards and 10 touchdowns. And this, if anything, I'll say that. Let me slow down. For the first, I'll say like this, for the first time in his career since about 88, this is probably like the first time that Rice did not lead the league in all three of those major categories. However, the 49ers did make it, however, the 49ers did, however, the 49ers did make it back to the NFC Championship, where they went up against the Dallas Cowboys, and so that game was a bit of a passing of the torch when it came to the team that ended up dominating the 90s, and the Cowboys ended up winning. But that 91-92 stretch was, like I said, was definitely an adjustment period for Rice, and his numbers showed. It's not saying that he was on a slump or anything, but if anything, it was just more so of a readjustment phase, if you will. And by the time we get into 93 on, he clearly, by the time we get to 93, by the time we get to 93 on down, his numbers go back up, and he's clearly clearly adjusted full swing. So once and of course with the 1993 season, was like I said, if anything, Rice was like I said, Rice was Rice was back, like I said, Rice was back to his better form, and so that season he had 98 receptions for 1,503 yards and 15 touchdowns. Let me say it again: 98 receptions for 1,503 yards and 15 touchdowns. And and of course for his production, he was named the offensive player of the year for the second time. First time in '87 because of 22 touchdowns, and this time once again in '93, because he led the league in yards and touchdowns. So for his production, he was awarded with that. And so by the time like I said, and of course, the following season turned out to be a rather historic season for him. Because of the fact that this was a season where Jerry became the NFL's all-time leader in touchdowns as he broke Jim Brown's previous record. And this also happened to be a flagship season for Steve Young as well. And let me slow down. In '94, Rice had 112 receptions for 1,499 yards and 13 touchdowns. So he led the league in receiving yards, and 49ers were back in full swing, and that let me slow down. That season, Rice also let me slow down. That season, Rice also passed Steve Largent for second place all time in receiving, I believe. And so and so of course that season, of course that season once again he was selected to the Pro Bowl and the first team All Pro, in typical Rice fashion. And that season the 49ers had a 13-3 record, and in the Super Bowl they absolutely destroyed the San Diego Chargers. Really, the Niners' real Super Bowl was actually against the Cowboys, and going to that game, sorry about that. Going to that game, Cowboys cornerback Larry Brown was calling himself like the Jerry Rice stopper, the guy, the guy that could shut Jerry down and everything like that. And so Jerry heard those words, and he made he made Larry and the rest of the Cowboys choke on those words. You know what I mean? And the thing and I'll say it like this: the 49ers were absolute world beaters. I would say that was the most defining game for the Niners of that entire season, whether it's regular season or postseason. That game in and of itself, like I said, like I said, just spoke volumes, and that was them planting the flag, because whoever they faced in the Super Bowl, it was already imminent that they were going to end up winning anyway. And the Chargers clearly had no business being in that game, and you know what I mean. And so and of course, let me slow down. Jerry was absolutely, like I said, if anything, in that I'll say it like this, in that Super Bowl in and of itself, Jerry would, like I said, once again, let me slow down. Jerry, let me slow down. In that game, Jerry was absolutely pivotal to the 49ers' success in that rout of the Chargers when they won 49-26. And in that game, which was Steve Young's 6 touchdown game, six touchdown performance game. In that game, Rice had 10 receptions for in that game, Jerry Rice had 10 receptions, 449 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So Rice caught half of Young's touchdowns. So once again, in Super Bowl 29, Jerry Rice, in my estimation, had the second best Super Bowl game of his career. Where he had 10 receptions, 449 yards, and 3 touchdowns in yet another 49ers route. And I noticed with San Francisco, especially during those days, for the most part, um, those Super Bowl wins were absolutely dominant. They were absolute routes. You know what I mean? The team that they went up against looked like they had no business being in it. And the Chargers were a perfect example of that. Had Steve Young not been the Super Bowl MVP, had he not had a had a Super Bowl record season, Super Bowl, pretty much, had he not had Steve Young had not let me slow down. Had Steve Young not had a record-breaking game, Rice would have been the Super Bowl MVP in my estimation. You know, but but of course, once again, Jerry continued to add to his legacy, continued to solidify his legacy, continued to cement his legacy, and so the following season in 1995. Jerry has a career high of 122 receptions for 1,848 yards and 15 touchdowns. And of course, from a statistical standpoint, this was the absolutely most impressive run of his career. And so I'm just, if anything, I'm just deciding where this season is going to rank among the absolute greatest. You know what I mean? And so, and another thing about this season was that this was absolute loaded season when it came to receivers. When it came to receiver production, Jerry with 122 receptions. Chris Carter had 122. Herman Moore had the record at the time with like 123. You know what I mean? Of course, Michael Irvin had like 111 receptions that season. So, you know what I mean? So the passing game that season was absolutely stacked. It was absolutely loaded. You know what I mean? And even though Jerry did not lead the league in receptions that year, but when it came to his yards, you know what I mean? He was second to none when it came to that. And however the 49ers failed. However the 49ers failed to repeat as Super Bowl champions. And of course, in 1996, which happened to be Jerry's last prime season, which was also Terrell Owens' rookie season as well. Jerry led the league in receptions for one final time for 108 yards, and of course, he had 1,254 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns as well. And so I would mark that as sort of like the ultimate end of Jerry Rice's prime. Because the next season, the next season he only played 2 games because because early on that season, he was early on during that 97 season, he was severely injured, and so he was limited to only 7 receptions for 78 yards, and if anything, that was the absolute worst season of his career, the worst injury of his career. However, he did bounce back in 98 for 82 receptions, 1,157 yards, 9 touchdowns. You know what I mean? And so of course, from 97 on down, though, those are the final years, twilight years of Jerry's time with the 49ers. And of course, after the 2000 season, he ends up going over to the Raiders, and so, and of course, has a second act. Has like a whole new, sort of like a whole new life, if you will, when it came to the Raiders, just to show everybody that he still had it. And of course, the first season with the Raiders in 2001, he had 83 receptions for 1,139 yards. You know what I mean? And of course, the next season, he actually went on to top that success, because in 2002, at 40, Jerry made the Pro Bowl, which was absolutely unheard of for a receiver. In that season, he had 92 receptions, 1,211 yards, and 7 touchdowns, and he was very instrumental in. Let me start out. In that 2002 season, Jerry was absolutely vital, instrumental in the Raiders going to the Super Bowl. However, unfortunately, they end up getting blown out by the Buccaneers, but whatever, this, that, and the third, yada, yada, yada. And so, and of course, after his last season with the Raiders, slow down. And of course, let me slow down. And of course, the next season will be his last with the Raiders in 2003. Then by the time we get to 2004, he ends up getting traded from the Raiders over to the Seahawks. Which is I've rather really not acknowledge that, really not mention that. You know what I mean? So in my estimation, that's not really canon. That's not how I would rather remember Jerry. And so if let me slow down. After of course after finishing the last leg of his career with the Seahawks, Jerry of course Jerry Rice, after that, Jerry Rice completed a 20-year career where he had where he still to this day has 1,549 receptions, 22,895 receiving yards, and 197 touchdowns. And to this day, he still holds most of the major receiving records. He still holds the most significant. He still holds the most significant records in NFL history when it comes to, of course, when it comes to wide receivers. And so like I said, not only those first three major records, but but also he has the most career yards from scrimmage, 23,540, most career touchdowns from scrimmage, 207. And so that's 197 receiving yards combined with 10 rushing touchdowns as well. Most career all-purpose yards, 23,546. Most career all-purpose touchdowns, 208. Most career postseason receiving yards, 2,245. Postseason receptions, 151. Postseason touchdowns, 22. Of course, most Super Bowl receiving yards, most career Super Bowl receiving yards, 589. Most career Super Bowl receptions, 33. Most career Super Bowl touchdowns with 8. Most career Super Bowl points scored with 48. Most games of 100 more receiving yards with 78. Most consecutive games with a reception, 274. Most consecutive games with a touchdown from scrimmage, 13. Most seasons of 1,000 more receiving yards, 14. Fastest player to reach 100 touchdown receptions within 120 games. Fastest player to reach 14,000 receiving yards, 164 games. We saw him, the fastest player to reach 15,000 receiving yards, 172 games, and most points scored by a non-kicker with 1,256. So my estimation when it comes to the greatest non-quarterback of all time, I definitely have to agree with Shannon Sharp and say Jerry Rice is the greatest non-quarterback of all time. With all those records with his name all over the history books. There's no denying it at all. And I know there are those who want to try to discredit or negate his greatness somewhat because of the quarterbacks that he played with. Now granted he did have Hall of Fame quarterbacks, absolutely amazing quarterbacks, quarterbacks that a lot of other receivers will only dream of playing with, Joe Montana, Steve Young. But at the same time, Jerry was disciplined. Jerry had the work ethic. Jerry was a great teammate. He was a guy that they wanted to throw the ball to. He was a guy that a guy that others wanted to play with. He wasn't known for having, he wasn't known for having like a prima donna attitude. He wasn't known for being problematic in the locker room. He wasn't known for being divisive or anything like that. So when you have those attributes, when you have that type of character, if anything, quarterbacks like that would love to throw the ball to you. You know what I mean? But also on the flip side, I can also make a case that he made them better. So for people that want to try to say that he was a product of his quarterbacks, but at the same time, if anything, I can make a very strong case that he elevated them, that he carried them in many ways, because before Jerry got there, Joe Montana never, ever, ever won a league MVP award. Since Jerry's arrival, Montana became a back-to-back MVP, and he put on the best. He had the best statistical seasons of his career. You know, same with Steve Young. Before Steve got to the 49ers, you can very well say that that he was floundering, pretty much on the road to mediocrity, the road to obscurity, So by the time he gets to the 49er, by the time Steve Young gets to San Francisco, he's got his work cut out for him, So just as Jerry was blessed and fortunate to play with a guy like Steve, I could very much turn let me slow down. I could very much flip the script when it comes to that argument as well, and say that playing with Jerry elevated Steve's game, and so I mean, what else can you really say? You know what I mean? And the thing about it is that it takes two to tango. So even though the quarterback is instrumental, but at the same time, it's oftentimes the wide receiver's job to make his quarterback look better and elevate the offense, elevate the passing game, And so I'll say it like this: if it was just about the quarterbacks, then then Jerry's other receivers, his other teammates, would have the type of career that he had. If it was just about the quarterbacks, then Dwight Clark, rest in peace, had the type of career that Jerry had. John Taylor had the type of career that Jerry had. You know what I mean? And so on and so forth. But it just so happened that he was the absolute best option when it came to the offense. I mean, his talent speaks for itself. His drive, his work ethic, his discipline, his commitment to excellence speaks volumes. His stamina, his longevity. You know what I mean? Like his route running. You know what I mean? So and his like if it like so all those different things. His timing when it came excuse me, slow down. His timing when it let me slow down. His timing when it came to his routes, all those different things, all those different components are what made Jerry who he was, and the fact that statistically he is head and shoulders above every other receiver in history. His legacy is light years ahead of every other receiver in history. Randy Moss included, T.O. included, Fitzgerald, you name it, you know what I mean? So, like I say, and I guess with this episode, I'm pretty much stating the obvious, but because this week is Jerry's 60th birthday, which is an absolute milestone, that's the reason why the reason why I'm taking out this time to highlight his greatness. And so, so of course, with that being said, it's time to get to with that being said, after I did that whole entire rundown of his career, now it is time to rank the greatest seasons of his prime from 11 to 1. So starting off, I have the 1991 season. The reason why I have this season ranked last is because this was the first season without Joe Montana, and this was an adjustment period. You know what I mean? So, and just a way to just to be more. It was his time to be more acquainted with with a new quarterback, with a new system, if you will. Even though the 49ers would still run the West Coast offense, but it was just more so about adjusting to his quarterback. So that's the reason why I have that have that season right where I have it ranked. So number 10, I have the 1992 season. At number 9, actually, sorry about that. Of course, at number 11, I have the 1991 season. At number 10, I have the 1992 season. And number 9, actually, I have the 1988 season. His very first Super Bowl season. And so, at number 8, I have the 1986 season, which was his very first Pro Bowl season. His very first, Pro Bowl season. His very first All Pro season as well. So And, you know, so of course, so that is, you know, so, you know, for those reasons is the reason why I have the 1986 season where I have it. So 11 is 91, 10 92, nine is, you know, of course, 9 is 88, 8 is 86, 7. You know, actually, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and you know, I'm actually gonna go and switch that around. So I'm actually gonna put the 96 season right here instead. So 11 is 91, 10 is 92. Um, 1191, 1092, 9 is 88, 8 is 90, 8 is 96, 7 is 86, and then 6 is 89. You know, and the reason why I have the 1989 season ahead of that is because of the fact that it was a back-to-back Super Bowl season, and so of course because because of that, that's the reason why I have that season ranked as high. And then right after that, I actually have the 1990 season. And then you know, if anything, that's actually my fifth highest rated Jerry Rice season. At number 4, I have the 1993 season. The reason why is because that was a season where he won his second Offensive Player of the Year award. At number 3, it was a tough one, but I'm actually going with the 1987 season. The reason why is because within a shortened season, he had 22 touchdowns. Even though it was only 12 games, he still set an NFL record. So that, you know, so of course that's the reason why I have that in the top 3. And I think that when you look at Jerry's catalog, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of people that have this season ranked somewhere in their top 5. And when it comes to greatest Jerry Rice seasons, you know, and for him to do that once again within a shortened span of time speaks volumes. Is actually a testament to his greatness. So number 2, I actually have to go with the 1994 season, and and the thing is, it was really, really tough, you know, because I think the reason why it was so tough is because this 1994 season was a flagship season when it came to setting records and, you know, surpassing certain players and things like that. And of course, most importantly, first and foremost, that was his, that was a Super Bowl season. That was his third and last Super Bowl season, so that's the reason why I have that. And number 2, and it was really tough, between number 2 and number 1. So number 1, actually, of course, for number 1, I actually have the 1995 season, the season where he had 122 receptions, 1,848 yards. So, and of course, if anything, I think that's more of a consensus choice, if you will, that 1995 season, and it is always a toss up between the 95 season, 94 season, 87 season, in my estimation. So, let me go. Of course, let me go and run down these seasons. And number 11 is 1991, and number 10, 1992. Number 9, of course, number 9, 1988. Number 8, 1996. Number 7, 1986. Number 6, 1989. Number 5, 1990. Number 4, 1993. Number 3, 1987. Number 2, 1994. And number 5, not number 5. I'm sorry. Number 2, 1994. And number 1, I'm sorry. Number 1 is 1995. Like I said, 11 is 91. 10, 92. 9, 88. 8, 96, 7, 86, 6, 89, 5, 1990, number 4, 93, number 3, 87, number 2, 94, and number 1, 95. So those are my 11 greatest Jerry Rice seasons of all time. Happy birthday to San Francisco's greatest. Happy birthday to the GOAT himself. And so, and thank you very much for everything that you've brought to the game, and wear this jersey as a sign of honor, as a sign of respect.